Hello, this is the next tutorial for the Elevation Tote, which is this guy here. So this is the bag that I've already made in natural, and you can see that it's more of a triangular shape, but you can also wear it as a square shape as well. So as the bag softens, it's going to naturally do that anyway, and as you put square items in there like a laptop or any A4 size documents or anything, that's going to push the gussets out. So it's up to you how you wear it. There's also an internal pocket at the back there, so that's really good for putting your phone and your keys or a small card holder or something like that inside. And then of course this comes to you with your embossing on it as well, so it's got my name on there. I'm going to remake this for you today, and I've chosen to cut it out in a different colour just to see what it's going to look like. So I've cut it out in bark, which is a really nice tan colour, and it's funnily enough the exact same colour as my desk, so let's hope that you can see what I'm doing throughout the tutorial. But I'll just go through the panels that you should have on your side. So this is the front and the back panels. They are exactly the same except for this mark, which will be on your back panel, and it's a U-shaped score line, which is indicating the pocket position. So you'll also have that pocket panel, and that's just indicating that that goes on the internal back piece. These will have your pre-cut stitching holes, so they're already made in the sides and the base of those panels. Same for the pocket panel, you'll have the pre-cut stitching holes in those as well. And you've got the base panel, which is this long rectangular piece that also has stitching holes in the short ends. And then you'll have your gusset panels, which are the side panels of the bag. The widest part of this is actually the top end, and then this is the base end of the gusset. There'll be no stitching holes on this because we'll copy them over from the front and the back panels. You'll also have your straps, and they're two very long pieces with stitching already made through the center, and they're empty on the short ends. So these are the ends that are going to go through the body seam of the bag. So they go just through there, and it's what makes this bag really strong because it's got these straps running through those seams. So no, it's not a mistake that they're not stitched all the way through. We're going to be stitching those through the ends as well. So you might have noticed as well that with these panels being shipped to you that I've rolled them up. So just before starting, you might want to just roll them back in the other direction so that they're nice and flat and ready for you to work with. Alternatively, you can just have them flat under some heavy books during the week before you're ready to work with them on the weekends. And then have your toolkit ready, and then we're ready to get started. First thing to get started is that we'll need to burnish some of the edges before we can actually stick them down and start stitching. We'll get out our burnishing gum and the sponge applicator, and just taking off most of the excess. So I'll start with the base panel. Just putting a liberal amount on, making sure it's absorbed into that edge, and then using the smallest gauge on the burnishing tool, give that a rub. And make sure you do both sides. So you're just waiting for that to polish up and get nice and shiny. Don't worry about those long edges, they're going to be covered. So the next piece you'll want to burnish is the pocket. So we'll do all 4 sides of this one. I'll just do 2 at a time to begin with because I don't want the gum to dry out before I get a chance to get the burnishing stick on it. You'll notice I flip the piece around when I want to do the other side, and that's only because I get a better grip on the leather piece when it's next to my hand. Stops it from flopping around so much. You'll also notice that you might be holding the tool at a certain angle and that it actually affects the way it's flicking on the leather. Yep, so pocket piece is done, and we'll also want to burnish the top edges of the front and back panel and the gusset panels. So that's those wider edges. So we'll do these first. Don't worry about burnishing those little angled corners in the end. Those will be hidden more or less inside the bag. You might find that you get like a turned up edge because it's kind of splaying out from the pressure of the burnishing stick. So you can also try going up in the more rounded gauge, and that might help a little bit. It really depends on the thickness of your leather as well that you're working with, and the pressure that you're pushing with the burnishing stick. So if you do get like a ridge on that, then you might want to go in with your sanding paper and just kind of take that hard edge off. And then just doing the top edges of the front and back. That's going to put a nice seal on those edges, so they shouldn't get too damaged or dirty over time. They're not going to absorb oils from your skin, and it gives it a degree of waterproofness as well. So you should have that on all the top edges of your gusset front and back pieces, all 4 edges of your pocket panel, and then your short edges of your base piece. I'll just pop those to the side for now. The straps as well, it's a good time to burnish while they're flat and not attached to the bag. I would only burnish the centres for now. We will burnish the outer part of that strap later on when we go to burnish the whole bag. So we do that in combination with the gusset and the front or the back panel already attached. So just leave the bottom half of the straps unburnished for now. We will just do the part that has the stitching. Just do it in sections. Go up to the second one, definitely, for this guy. That'll give it a nice rounded finish. So you want to get it up to a nice polish. So you'll see that this will take you some time, so I will speed the video up. But take as much time as you want on this to make it all nice and consistent and to the colour that you prefer as well. This colour will darken really, really nicely. So you're more than welcome to take it as dark or as light as you want. Just spend as much time as you need on this so that you'll get that nice, beautiful edge. So I'm just burnishing a little bit past the stitching as well, just to make sure that none of this is going to poke out on the top of the top line of the bag. So I'm just taking it like a centimetre or two past the stitches. It might end up being very well that the bag ends up finishing over that stitch, over those stitches anyway. But it's just in case something goes a bit different. So I've just done one side now. It's looking really nice. But you'll go ahead and you'll do the back side of that as well, plus you'll do the second strap. So I'm just showing you a bit of a closer up of what it looks like when it's burnished and what it looks like when it's not. So it's a much rawer finish on the leather, and when it's burnished it's got that nice gloss. So I'll just go ahead and do the next part of the strap and I'll speed this next bit up. Cool, so that's one strap done, both sides. There is an option to burnish at least one side of these empty lengths, and reason being is that these will be visible on the inside of the bag. So we'll burnish one side when it's already stitched on the outside, but you can go ahead and burnish these empty lengths as well. I will do so for my bag. My hand is getting tired, if yours is too, and that's just after one strap. It is a lot of work, and that, you know, a lot of work does go into the bags that I make, so this could be an exit point for you where you choose not to burnish those empty lengths, just because they will be only visible on the inside of the bag. But if you did want to do that, do at least the same side as your strap, so you've got each strap faced the same way. So this will be on the inside of your bag, and I'll probably just do a quick job of this. The benefit of doing it, even though it is on the inside of your bag, if not just for visuals, just to prevent it getting dirty, because you know, we tend to throw our whole lives into our bags without much care these days. So especially if you've bought the natural colour in this bag, those edges will get dirty over time if they're not protected. So this is just acting as a sealant, so it will make this last longer. So I just did a really quick job on that one, not taking into account too much whether the colour was where I wanted to take it. You can go ahead and do the rounded edge on that as well. The rounded edge is actually hard to get to once it's stitched in. Go ahead and burnish that. And then just making sure when you do the other side that it's the same side, that there's no twist that's happened in your strap, that it is the same side. So that's one strap done for me. Go ahead and do the other strap exactly the same, and I'll see you over on the next step. So what you should end up with is 2 straps fully burnished on both sides where the stitching is, and then just on one side on the empty length, but the same side, and then the same on the other strap. So those 2 ends are burnished. The other side's not, so that will end up facing outwards when we assemble the bag, but then both sides are burnished where the stitching is. So now we can start gluing. Cool, so the first bit of assembly that we're going to do is gluing our pocket panel onto the inside of that back panel. So the back panel, as I mentioned earlier, is where I've already scratched in that U shape where that leather piece is going to sit within. So that's the very outer edge of the pocket, and what we're going to do with the glue is do a really tiny line just on the inside of that U scratched line, and then we'll do the same gluing, just covering those stitching holes on the inside of that pocket panel. I'll do the gluing on that first. So just using the foam brush inside the glue, you don't need a lot, and just that technique where we dab and then flick up so that we are making sure that we're not actually gluing over the edge of that pocket panel. The other thing I'm making sure of is that I'm not gluing too far beyond the stitching holes, because then that's actually going to take up capacity inside the pocket space. You're just trying to limit the glue in between the stitching holes and the very edge of your leather. So that's the pocket one done. Then when we get to this U shape, just sticking inside that line. So if you put the glue on in a dabbing motion, that will help you to limit how wide the glue actually gets applied, so you can keep a really skinny line. Once that's been glued, make sure you pop the cap on that, and make sure you're also cleaning the glue off the foam brush. So this is just a jar of water. You can put some detergent in there as well. That'll help get the glue off. This was just a tiny amount of glue though, so I'm just wetting it off because it is a water-based glue. That should be enough for now. But don't ever let the glue harden on these brushes. That'll just render them useless. And then just dry that, ready for the next use. Great, so let these to dry, and then we're going to join them. So you know that that's dry when it's nice and clear and it's pretty tacky, so it'll start sticking. We're going to join these together now, so those two tacky sides are going to be nicely cemented together. The best way is just to get a really nice bird's eye view over the work so that you can get this stuck down. Just take care that you make sure that you've got the top edge of that pocket panel on facing the top edge of the bag, so that that's going to remain open and that we're sealing off the base so that these two glued lines are actually going to connect. So you can match up your corners first. If you do pop it down in the wrong spot, just peel it off. And if you can help it, just lightly drop it into position before you actually press anything. And then once you're happy with it, press it all down. You can also use the bone folder just to help you press it down. This will just squeeze any air from out where that glue is and just make sure that it's nicely cemented together. So now that that's glued, we'll have to pass all of these stitching holes through to the other side so that then we can actually do the stitching. The way we do that is with our polyboard underneath so that we don't damage our desk, and with our awl, we're going to pass all of these through, just poking one at a time. So just to give you a closer view on this, we're poking with the awl. We want to make sure that this is a 90-degree angle to the work so that we're not holding it like this, we're not holding it like this, and that is going to guarantee that the hole on the other side is going to come out in relatively the same spot what it looks like on this side. When we're pushing it down, it might be a good idea to use two hands so that we give ourselves nice big holes. So you can see there the holes come through the other side. The other hole we're going to need, which is not marked, is one that is just going to extend the same stitch length basically in the same line just on the other side of that pocket so that we can eventually do an overlapped stitch that's going to hold this pocket top edge down and it's going to be nice and secure. So you'll have two stitching holes made just on the other side there. And then we're going to go through and punch them all. If you're managing to get the same size holes with just one hand, then go for it. You can stand up and put your body weight into it. That will really help as well. Every now and then, just flip the work around and see that you are in fact poking the holes all the way through and that they're looking nice and neat and in line with each other, and then you can keep going. Great, so that's the whole pocket panel punched through and then all the holes showing through to the other side. Moving on to the stitching, you'll grab your thread. You'll have one of these little packet threads, but they're very similar quality to the one that I'm demonstrating with today. So it's 100% linen. For every seam length we'll be working with, just as a rule of thumb, it'd be good to take 4 times the length of the seam. So that would be 1. Stop that from rolling away. Double it over. That's 2. And then I would let go of that and then double that again. And that will give you 4. Cut that. And then pass it through the beeswax. So this beeswax comes from a place called Columbine Naturals. I think they're over in New South Wales. I don't think it's intended exactly for this. I think they sell it to make beeswax wraps and stuff like that. It is a bit yellow, some would say, for using on a natural thread for leatherwork. But to be honest, I think it works perfectly fine. I haven't noticed any yellowing of the thread myself, and I think it works great for this purpose. Once you've got that, just take your clean towel and pass it through just to take off any excess. And that should do it. Then threading both ends with your needles. And we're going to lock the needle in just about 10 or 15 centimeters from the tail, just past that needle through the center of the thread. Pull that down and then pull the body of the thread so that that knot that you've just made ends up near the eye of the needle. And then go ahead and do the same thing on the other side. Great, so with both needles ready to go, we're going to start just in the second stitch hole, so it's actually 3 holes in. Put that halfway through, and we're actually going to start from the outside because what we're going to do is do this overlap stitch. So with this technique where we're using finger tension to make our saddle stitching, it's easier to go left to right, so that's why we flip the bag over, or the panel over at this stage. So we're inserting it in the stitch to the very right side of where we've just entered, pass that front needle through, pull it all the way through, and then taking that front needle that you've just passed through and wrapping that over your forefinger and underneath your third finger on your left hand. And then that will enable you to grab the back needle and bring that through to the front. And then just lifting that hand slightly, or that forefinger, so that you can create some tension and that you're actually tightening that stitch. And then repeat. Repeat till you get to the end. So then we'll just flip over. So then we're working from left to right on the other side. So then passing that front needle through to the back, you just want to watch that you're not piercing any of the stitches that are already there. Make sure that you're bypassing them. And continuing on with that finger tension to get your stitch work nice and neat. So I'm just going to go ahead and stitch this whole pocket. I will speed the video up a little bit, and then I might pause and explain a few things along the way. So just watch out for that throughout the video. Okay, so I lost a bit of video there, so you can see I've stitched quite a bit without you seeing, but that's okay. You'll still see the most of it. might be a good idea about halfway through to reapply some beeswax to your thread, just because that thread's gone through every single hole in your work, and the beeswax is just going to help to keep it protected because it's probably come off. So we've finished the complete stitching. I'm just in the last hole. So this is the part where I would flip it around and do my overlap stitch back in the other direction. And I'm going to do that knot that I normally do on my second hole. So we're trying to mimic what we've done on the other side, so it's not really obvious where we started and where we finished. So do the first stitch as normal and try to get those overlap stitches parallel to each other so they look really nice. And then on the second hole, this time leave the loop open on the other side. Still take that so that you can position that back needle alongside. And for this one, we'll want to do any kind of knot on the inside of the bag. We'll just thread this through twice, like that, and then we'll pull that so that we complete the stitch on the outside of the bag. And then to get this to knot itself, we'll yank this needle closed. And so give it a bit of a tug from both sides, and that should tighten the knot in the cross section of the leather. That's almost finished, but we'll snip that really close to the work, like that. Just get rid of these. So if you just pull on the tail, it should actually just either break or get your needles free as quick as possible. Grab your poly board out, and just in that hole where you've put the loop, just stretch it out a little bit, and then grabbing your glue, we're just going to put a little glue on the inside of that stitching hole. So try and pass that all the way through, and you can even put some glue onto the ends of that thread just on the outside. Any spillage on the leather, just take that off. And then just inspect what it looks like on the other side. Sometimes the glue does pop out the other side of the hole and spill on the leather. So just clean up any excess glue and then let that to dry. While that's drying, I'll take my bone folder and I'm going to squash the threads. So normally I would do this with a cobbler's hammer with a nice hard desk underneath, but in lieu of having a nice cobbler's hammer, the bone folder does the trick. So we're actually just squashing those threads down so that they're more flush with the leather surface. So if you feel what these threads are feeling like just by running your finger over the surface, you will feel that the threads are quite raised. Here they're nice and flat. So that will also prolong the life of these threads, so they're not rubbing on anything unnecessarily. They're least likely to get that wear and tear. Just be careful not to rub too hard and fast on your lighter leathers, because that could also cause some burnishing. You can also do it from the other side of the bag too. Again, just watch that you're not burnishing the leather. That you're just touching the thread. And then that's still probably drying. I can see because it's still white. We'll get some spillage of the glue out if we press it and it's still wet, but that's okay. Probably presses the glue into the areas where it needs to go, so it's okay. You might just get some glue on your desk which you can rub off. So that's the pocket finished. Hopefully you found that experience nice, and hopefully your stitching isn't looking too bad from the other side. Normally if I was machining this, I would be stitching it from this way, and you'd get the nicest looking stitch on the pocket panel, and you would get the bobbin thread or the underside of the stitch work on the outside of the bag. With this hand stitching method where we're poking the holes through, this is the best way to do it, to have the holes on the pocket panel and then you pass them through to the outside of the bag. Or we could use a pricking iron from this side to punch all the holes through to the other side and then we'd have the holes really nicely marked on this side, and they'd be the right angled holes that we need to do the stitching. Then we could nominate this as the preferred side to start our stitching. But in lieu of all of those tools, this is the best way that we can get it done, using this easy method of just passing the holes through with the awl. And I think all in all, it doesn't look bad at all. It still has that angle to it. It isn't as neat as this face of the work, but I think it's still a really, really nice execution of saddle stitching. And having the two overlapped on either side gives it a nice balance as well. So do let me know how you go with this. There is a lot of stitching to do in this tote. We'll get on to the base panel now. So next we're going to attach the base panel to our gusset panels. You'll see at the base of the gusset panels, I've given you that really faint crease line already. So you'll see that on both. And that line there is to tell you exactly where the edge of that base panel is going to overlap until. So it's going to give you that perfect seam allowance. This line also tells you where to sandpaper up until. So grab your sandpaper from your kit. You might also want to put something down to protect your bench. So I've got a notepad here, and then just using the edge of the sandpaper, just scratching the leather up until that line. So this is on the top side of the leather. We're just taking off any of that smooth finishing that's on the leather that's going to resist any of the glue that we put on. And you just want to take extra care not to sandpaper over that line, because then it's going to be visible beyond the seam that we make. So do that on both gussets. That's enough. Now we're ready for gluing. So opening up your glue pot, get your foam brush ready, and we are going to glue up into that line, and just taking care not to go beyond the line. You will notice I smooth out the glue quite a lot so that it's all consistent. Any white spots of glue that are left over will take longer to dry, so I just try and make sure that it's all really consistent. So we can glue up both of these at the same time. Just like so. We're going to do the same on the short ends of the base panel. So roughly the same width that we've just glued up there, we'll just glue to the edge on the underside of that base panel. Just rub off any glue you get on your bench. And just taking care you're not getting any glue on the very edge. So I just lost a chunk of video, which I can't redo because I've already gone ahead and punched all the holes in the edge of that base panel, and I've done that on both sides already. So just moving across there, you can see there that this is now been stuck down where we just glued, and I have positioned it so that it's just touching the scored line that was on that gusset piece. So you can see that the holes have come through as well onto that other side, and this is that skived edge of the leather, so it means it's been feathered out to take off some of the thickness right on the edge there, and that's been done on both sides. So the holes have been passed through with the awl, exactly like we did before with the pocket, using the polyboard and the awl, and these have been stuck down, so you can see there that it's exactly right on the line, so you can't even see the line. So now we just need to prepare the thread for the two seam lines that we need to do. I'll just prepare them both at the same time just to make life easier. So we're taking 4 times the seam length in thread, so that's 1, and then double that again for 4. And because this is such a small seam, I'm just going to take a little bit extra to cover the tail length that extends past the eye of the needle, so about that. And I'll just cut a second one so that one of them's just going to cover one seam, so we'll do a second one for that one. And we'll beeswax both of these as well. Great, grab your towel, smooth out that beeswax, just taking off any excess as well. This also straightens out the thread really nicely. And just put one to one side so that's ready when you do the second seam. And then we're just threading the eye of the needle and locking the thread as we've done before. Just make that nice and flat. And the same on the other side. Great, so once you've done that, you're ready for stitching. So we'll do the same here where we're going from left to right as we've done before. We will do some overlap stitching to finish. We might as well do the same at the beginning as well, just so that we're keeping things symmetrical. So let's start here, 3 holes into the seam, and we'll even out the length of thread equally on both sides, then flip around so that we can work our way from left to right. So poking through and passing it over to hold that tension. And we're just completing these 2 stitches to the end of the seam. So now that I've got those first 2 stitches coming this way, we're going to go back and overlap. And just remembering that when we're overlapping stitches, we're not piercing the existing threads that are there, just so we're not deteriorating them. Try and get those threads nicely stacked parallel on top of each other as well. That'll make your stitch work look really nice and clean. And it might be a little bit of flipping this panel back and forth so that you can see what you're doing. But as these are really short seams, it shouldn't be too much of a hassle for you. If you find that they're crisscrossing without you meaning to, you can always grab the awl and reposition them so that they're sitting a lot nicer. There we go. And I would worry more about the stitch work on this side, more than the stitch work on this side, because this is going to be on the inside, right on the bottom of the bag. You're not going to see those stitches as much, so it's more of an aesthetic thing. So now we can just go through and stitch all the way to the end of that seam. And it might be just easier for you to keep the panel in this orientation, so you're looking at the back of the work. A little bit easier than flipping the leather back and forward if you can manage it. Great, so now we're all the way to the end of that seam. So what we'll do is we'll switch orientation again and we'll do our 2 overlap stitches going in the other direction. So the same thing as before, when we're piecing back through, we want to make sure we're not splitting the threads that are already in there. And then just on that last one, leave a loop so don't close the stitch. And do that the same for this thread as well. Yep. And on the inside, so we're curling the needle twice through this back loop that's on the back side of the work, and we'll close that stitch, which effectively closes the stitch on the front of the work first. Give that a good tug, and before we close this stitch, just manipulate those threads if you need to, if they're doing something strange. As straight looking as possible. You might need to flick things around with the awl. Like that. And then give this one a really tight tug. And that will suck in those loops that we just made into the cross section of the leather. It's actually popped out the front, and if that happens, then you'll just need to play a bit of a tug of war with the opposite needle. Don't want those loops hanging out on the front of the work. So then we're cutting those flush against the leather, and we'll add the glue into that last hole there when we've gone ahead and finished that seam. So we'll do the exact same thing that we've done there, again with this stitch line. So both stitch lines have been completed now, and we just need to do the final finishing steps to complete these. So that is grabbing our glue and our awl, and just open that last hole where we made the knot with the awl, and grabbing a little bit of glue on the end
to seal that up, and you can just scrape some glue onto the outside as well so that it adheres to the tail where we cut it.
Cool. Let that to dry a little bit. While that's drying, we will just press our stitching down nice and flat with the button folder.
You can go over the hole with the glue in it. You just might need to clean up any glue spillage.
So the base has now been attached to your gussets, and this is now ready to be glued to the back panel of the bag, like so. So the next stage is actually making the base stitch along the back panel and attaching it to the actual base panel. So we'll need to glue this seam to this seam here, and the way this is actually finished is what's called a blind seam. So this is the back panel here. So we'll glue the right sides of the leather together and we'll stitch it from the inside, and then when we open that back out, you don't actually see any top stitching, and it gives it this kind of flat look. And the reason why we do that is because when things are inside the bag, this is going to flatten out anyway. So it's nice that that seam is a little bit less conspicuous than some of these other top stitch seams. So because we're going to be gluing the top sides of the leather together, we do need to roughen them up a little bit. So that's when we'll need our sandpaper, and welcome to get out something to protect your tabletop with. And we're just going to roughen up the areas underneath the stitching holes. Just like that. Don't go beyond the stitching holes, otherwise that's going to be visible on the exterior of the bag. So all of that is now nice and rough. Place that to the side, and we'll do the same here, and you're just taking note to the measurement that you've done here. So it's about 5 mils, so you can be quite conservative with how much you actually sand on this panel.
It doesn't have to be exactly the 5 mils, just in case you do run over. This is just going to guarantee the best adhesion of the glue, so as long as you roughed up a section of it, then it should be fine.
And you can go ahead and flip that around and do both sides. And while we're at it, grab your front panel as well, and also do the same step on the base seam of that. So taking your base panel and your back panel, we're going to glue up both seam allowances.
So taking care not to glue over the holes, you're just gluing a little bit before the holes and to the edge. And it doesn't matter as much with this seam if you're spilling over the edge, because that's going to be hidden inside the bag. You might want to pop something down to protect your table though. And just put that aside to dry. At this stage you can nominate if you want a certain part of this to be the back and which part you want to be the front. It really depends on what cut of the leather you have in front of you. You can see that this half has probably got a little more scars on it than this half does, so I'm going to nominate this as the back part of my bag, because as you saw, when the bag bottoms out, you do see half of the base panel more on one side than you do on the other. So the back of the bag less often seen, and I'm going to nominate this as the back for that reason. So just gluing up the same measurement that you did on the back piece. and just allow that to dry as well. We will do this one at a time, only because it is big and bulky, so it's a bit easier to tackle it one side at a time. Just making sure you clean your brush and drying it off, ready for next time. That's just water in there, and allowing that to dry. So that glue's nice and dry now, and it's tacky. So you can see that it's at the right tackiness level when it's sticking to your fingers, and you should have no white spots in any of the parts that you've glued up. So then to pop this together, we're lining this up edge to edge, but you'll also be lining up the corner of this mitre to the very corner of the base panel on both sides as well. So you can start with one end first and make your way to the other end, and just make sure that all your edges are really nicely lined up. Just give that a nice squish. And then we'll start poking the holes there to pass them through the other side. When we're poking the holes, we want to be really careful that this first hole in the corner is lining up with the first hole of that base seam that we've already stitched. So you can actually do that by coming through from the other side and finding it, rather than poking new holes and just trying to match them up. So it might work out that it's directly on top of each other, and it might be that you kind of need to find it and drag it across and line it up. So ensure that that's your first hole of the seam, and then the rest of the holes will be made new by poking all of these through to the other side. And then just with the last hole on this side, do the exact same thing, where we're actually lining that up with the last hole we made in the base seam. So we're not making new holes there either. Might need to bunch that leather in slightly. That's the great thing about leather, it's very forgiving when you need to move things around. So we'll just make sure that we use that hole for the first and last part of this seam. So then the next stage after you've poked through all of those stitching holes is preparing your thread. And like we did with the base seam, where we have two seams exactly the same length, we also will have two seams exactly the same length. So we'll do this one first, and then once that's complete, we will then also have to complete this stitching seam. So we might as well do two lengths of thread the same, just to save a bit of effort later. So we'll measure 4 times the length of that seam, so that's twice, and then we'll double that to get 4. And I will take a little bit extra again, just to make sure I've got enough for the tails, and then we'll take a second one of that as well. And then rubbing through the beeswax. And through the towel. Keep one to one side, and we'll use that later. And just threading one of them for now, and locking that needle in, pierce through the center of that thread, and pulling that towards the eye of the needle, and then repeat for the other side. So with this seam, we will still go from left to right, but because it's a blind seam, so it means it's hidden, you don't see it from the outside of the bag, there's no point in doing these fake overlap stitches in the beginning, like we've been doing with these seams here. So we can just start in the first hole, make our way across, and we will overlap for 3 just at the end to secure our thread. So all done with that seam. You'll see at the end there that I've gone ahead and done my 3 overlap stitches going in the other direction, and I've popped the knot there in the very last stitch. It doesn't really matter what side you put that loop on. It is going to end up in the middle anyway. It will be on the inside of the bag, so you won't see it whether it shows up on any of the particular sides. So we will still put a bit of a glue dot in that last hole, just to secure that last knot even more so. And we will still also flatten those stitches with the bone folder. So this will prevent any unnecessary abrasion from objects that you put inside your bag, and help to give a more flat seam on the other side as well. Beautiful. So you can open that up and see how it's looking beautiful, and you'll be really nicely lined up in the corners on either side. So after you've finished attaching the back panel to the base, we're going to go ahead and do the exact same steps to attach the front panel to the base. So back to when we were gluing, we will also glue these two seams together, and then we will make the same stitching line. We will have a bit of a cross pattern happening, but it is better to do both sides of the bag at the same time, just because you've been used to doing one stitch first. It is really good to do the next stitch at the same time. We'll start to see the bag coming together really nicely. So just remembering not to go too far into the base panel, that we're just sticking to that 5mm or less seam allowance that we've got available. Otherwise we're going to have some glue showing beyond those stitches. I have just noticed that I missed a stitch here on my base panel. So that's going to be a cute little telltale that this bag was handmade. I'm not going to get too fussy about that. Sometimes that's nice to see little mistakes like that, and then you know it was a handmade product. So just leave that aside to dry and go ahead and put the glue along the baseline of the front panel. Beautiful. Close that glue up and try not to overlap these while they're drying, and clean that brush. So those are nice and dry. We're going to stick them together as we did last time, making sure that this corner is lined up with the corner of the base panel and this inside corner is lined up with that. So line up those corners first, and then lining up all those edges. Give it a nice press. And then we're ready to mark through all of our stitching holes with our awl. So just as we did before, this first hole needs to be lined up with the last hole that we made in that base seam. But just because I actually missed a stitch in there, you can see actually there's the hole that I missed. So I'm just going to punch that through to the other side, and that's the hole I'm going to use to line up with the very corner hole on my front panel. So now that I've got that one lined up, I'm ready to punch the remaining.
Great, so just also making sure that you've got the very last hole lining up with the last hole on your base seam as well. So all of those are now firmly poked through and we're ready for stitching again.
So now we're taking that thread that we prepared earlier and threading that up. Both sides as usual. And we will do this the same as the last seam that we did. So beginning on the very first stitch. And we'll make our way all the way to the end and do 3 overlap stitches to cast it off.
So once you've stitched that final seam attaching the front panel to the base, it'll start to form a bit of a cross once it's open. And the next stages is actually turning this right way out and starting to glue the gusset and the back panels together along these side seams. And whilst we're doing this, we're also going to glue the straps into that seam. So you'll notice that the base will fold in a bit of a strange way. So to fix this, what we actually need to do is give it a bit of a chop, and that will release the base seam to what we want it to look like. So we will actually cut it later so that it is rounded to follow the shape of the strap, but to release it from the stitched seams that we've already made, we just need to give it a cut. So we're not going to cut the front or the back panel, we're just going to cut the gusset panel to release it from that seam. And to do so, I'm just going to give it a cut along that baseline so that it meets that very first stitch, just like that. So that when I then bring this up to meet the back panel, that exposed seam is going to be a bit more square. We are going to trim this later so that it follows that rounded shape of the strap like that, but just to release it, we're just going to make that little incision. So you can go ahead and do that on all four corners of the base. Just be careful that you're not actually cutting any existing threads, or that you're not cutting the front or the back panel either. You're just making a cut into the gusset. So what we'll do first is we'll have to attach the back strap. So grabbing one of your straps and taking a look at the stitch work so that you can figure out what's the top side and what's the underside. The top side needs to be visible beyond the back panel, so you don't want to see the underside like this. We should visually see the top side of the thread, and the length of the strap should meet, if this was underneath, should meet just before the very first stitching hole, which will cover at least some of that overlapping that we've made. And you'll also just need to make sure that the burnishing that you've done is on the inside. So we want the raw edge on the outside, so we're going to attach it like this. So flip that body panel around, and now with the top stitching, the right side of it will need to face down. That raw edge of the strap will be against the very edge of that back panel, and we'll be lining up the same on the other side, like so. And we'll also be lining up the very rounded tips to the very first stitching holes. So not the holes along that baseline seam, it's the holes along this side seam, so that very first stitching hole there. So it'll just need to sit somewhere in between the first and the second hole, so that that first stitch is actually going to overlap the end of the strap. And so this is going to be glued first here, and then we will glue this on top of that later to meet it. The first thing we'll need to do is just roughen up that leather edge. So we'll do that first so that the contact glue is going to adhere to the strap really nicely. So if we just remember this distance here, so it's about 5 millimeters, we're just going to scratch 5 millimeters along each side of that strap where the raw edge is present, so that we know that that is the part that's going to be glued and it's going to make good contact with the leather. So I'll pop this aside for one moment, and we might as well do both straps at the same time when we're scratching this up. And I'll just pop my notebook to protect my table, and then just making sure I've got that raw edge facing up.
Just give it a light scratch. If you can see that the colour is changing and it's taking off that top finish, then you know that it's doing the right thing, so that the glue is going to penetrate through that and stick really well. So doing the other side of that as well, making sure that you're along the raw edge on this side as well, and doing the same 5mm seam allowance. I am doing this quite roughly and just by eye. If you do happen to go over that 5mm slightly, it isn't the end of the world, because this remaining width of the strap is only visible on the inside of the bag. So the main thing is that you're just at least trying to maintain a narrow distance there, and that you're not scratching the whole width of that strap up, because that could look quite messy on the inside of the bag. And then doing the same to the other end of the strap. And just flipping that around to do the other face. And doing the same to the other strap again. So making sure that you're doing it to the side where the raw edge is only. So once that's done, we can bring our bag panel back, and getting our glue as well, flip that around to the other side. So you should have the reverse side of the bag facing you. And we're going to glue up the seam allowance here on the panel at the back. So getting right into that corner, but not going over the stitching line, just the seam allowance. You can actually touch the holes. It's less of an issue if you do go over those holes on this part of the bag, because it's all going to be visible only on the inside of the bag, and it doesn't actually matter in terms of the bag's capacity or taking up volume inside the bag if the strap is adhered to the panel any extra area beyond the stitch line. So it's not the biggest of deals if you do glue a little bit beyond the stitch line. What is important though is that you do apply the glue all the way to the edge, and that is so that when we burnish that seam later, that all the leather is glued together and it's not going to split. So making sure that it's all the way to the edge, just like that. And I'm going to do this edge as well, this gusset edge. So just trying to mimic the same width that you've just glued on that back panel. And you can see that there's this little mitre corner on the top edge. That's giving you an idea of what that seam allowance width is as well. So same thing here, making sure you're gluing all the way to the edge. And then just into that cut that we made earlier is where we'll leave that. We're going to do the same gluing to the other half of the back panel and the other side of the gusset.
While that's drying, just pop that aside and then take one of your handles, and firstly we're going to glue up the edge that is on the top side of the handle. That's good for now. You might want to bring that body panel back in and just double check how it's fitting with the height of your panel, and whether you might need to add a bit of glue to those top stitches. So I might just glue up past the first 2 stitches, but not quite the third, because they're going to be hidden and those will be exposed. Pop the cap on your glue, but wash this as well. We will use it again in a second, but it's not good to let that harden. This leather does have a nice waxy top coat on it, so any glue should come off nicely. This looks like it's pretty nice and tacky now, so we're going to go ahead and stick this down. Open this out nice and flat, lining up the base first with that first hole and running it along that edge. Don't stretch the strap at all, just place it down where it wants to lay flat, then just run your to really press it down. And I've just hidden those first 2 stitches, but only just. So when I do this side, I'm actually going to line up and make sure that I fully cover those 2 stitches which I've glued. And then I'll also line up the base of that strap near that first hole, and I'll make sure that it is evenly distributed along the way, so that any volume isn't wavy like that. The other important thing is to make sure that when you're pressing that down is that you don't have any twist happening in the top of that strap. So it should just be one continuous flow. So that's looking really nice. And there's just one little overlap stitch visible on both sides. So now we're going to apply the glue on this half of the strap. So we'll bring this pot out again. If you haven't squeezed out the water enough from the foam brush, you'll find that it adds a lot of water to the glue, and then this will come out very watery. So that's why I do dry the brush in between every time I use it. So once that's nice and tacky, this is ready to stick together. So we're going to stick this side to this side, and the best way to do this is to line up the top edges first and then try and even any volume along the way. So lining these 2 up, so that corner on that mitered edge needs to line up with the corner on that back panel, and you're trying to keep the line, the very edge, lined up with the edge of the strap as well. This will be extremely tacky and it will want to stick as soon as it touches the other surface, so just try and control it as much as you can, and then pressing down the rest. Before you run it all the way down to the base, just try and line that base up as well with that incision that we made, pulling that out and lining that up right at the end. So we need a bit of manipulation like so, and then you can come from the other side and see if you can touch down somewhere in the middle, lining the edges up and distributing any excess at the halfway point as you go along. So you will have this weird little knobby bit at the moment, which is fine for now. We're going to trim that later. So just squeeze it together so that it kind of sucks around that little rounded end of the strap, so that glue sticks together, and then we'll trim that excess off right at the end.
before we burnish. And let's go ahead and deal with the other half. At this point, it would be good, you would have 2 dog clips in your kit. I have stupidly left mine at the studio because I'm filming this from my study at home. Those dog clips are there for parts in the bag making process like this, where you've got a lot of parts that are fighting each other, and this might be a weak point at the moment, just at the top here, where as you're moving things around, this might rip off. So the dog clip should be placed right along the stitching line, because as you clamp it down onto the leather, it will leave a mark, and that mark will be hidden once that stitching, once the thread is actually stitched over that line. So if you place the teeth or the clamp of the dog clip just at that stitch line at the top here, that's going to at least make sure that this is not going to rip off at any point. So now we're going to attach this guy first, and then the bottom point next, just leaving that middle open. Like that. And then getting this evenly placed along the length of that seam. Starting to look like a bag now. You'll notice as well that I'm not pressing this stitching line out. This is just my personal preference, to be honest. I do kind of like this pillow effect at the moment, but you're more than welcome to push this out a little bit with your fingers and just folding that inside seam just a touch. You can also get your bone folder in there too to really press that out. This will soften eventually though, like when you put your things inside and the bag gets used, that will eventually flatten out. But just for this initial stage, I do kind of like the pillow effect that's happening there. So I won't press that out. And just to show you a comparison as well of how that seam is looking versus this one here, which was pressed out. So I was, on this bag, I did fold the inside seam allowance and pressed it with the bone folder. So you've got that really flat look. So that's just a difference there. So now we've got to do the same thing that we did on the front. So I'm going to glue up all the seam allowance along these side panels and along the gusset sides as well, and then I'm also going to add glue to the remaining strap just on the top side first, and we're going to do all of that again. I will speed that up in the video though.
So it's all glued up now and it's starting to look like a bag, which is awesome. If you're not too happy about that, which it's actually looking more exaggerated than I thought, then you can just get in there and folding that seam allowance up and giving it a bit of a press will help to flatten that and make it look less exaggerated. And you can do that on both sides. So I'm just pressing that against the palm of my other hand to try and encourage that to sit a bit more flat. That's looking pretty good. So this is ready to pierce all those stitching holes through to the other side and then ready for stitching.
So to poke these holes through, I'm going to start with the back side of the bag, and I've got the poly board kind of wedged so that I'm not poking through to the other side of the bag. So just placing that underneath, I've got the back of the base panel folded like so, and then we're just going through and poking those holes like so. It might be worth to say actually that you don't want to create any pattern from this poly board on the other half of that gusset. So you can lay your towel down, even your notepad in between, just so that any texture from that doesn't transfer. So once you've finished poking all the holes for the first side seam, I'm now moving on to the second side seam of the back panel, and I will speed this up and you'll also get to see me poke the holes for the front side seam as well. So once all of the stitching holes have been poked with the awl, the next step to do is to prepare all your threads. So just as we did before when we've got multiple seams the same length, I prepared all the threads at the same time. I would do the same for these as well. We'll make these 4 times the seam length. So just do that by doubling the first length and then doing that again to make 4. And then take a generous amount extra, just because this is quite a thick seam now. And just take maybe a good 30 centimeters more beyond that.
So that's one length, and just go ahead and take 4 of those from your thread. Just take care that they're not knotting up as you draw it from the card that you've been given. So the total length of thread required for this bag is about 10 meters, and the card that you have is 15 meters, so you should have plenty there. If you do run out of thread, just get in touch with me. That might be because you've had to redo a seam, or something went wrong and your thread broke halfway through and you've had to draw more thread. But if for any reason you've run out of thread, just get in touch with me and I'll send you some more to finish your bag. So I've got 4 lengths of thread now. I'm going to beeswax coat all of them. Last one, and just making sure to pass them through the towel as well. Just find the clean part that isn't too wet from the brush and just wipe away just to smooth. When you've got this many threads to deal with, sometimes a good spot to put them is around your neck. Keeps them out of the way. So now that all threads are done, they're all ready to go. If I were you, I would be setting myself up in front of the television and finishing the rest of the bag. So once you've done the first seam, I'm sure you'll feel pretty confident to do the remaining 3. I'll get you to start off on the back panel first. That's kind of where I normally get people to start when they're totally new to leathercraft or new to the project in general, and that's what really should encourage you. And every time you get to the next one, you get better and better and faster, and then your best stitching work is going to end up on the front of the bag. That's why I always will get you to start on the back panel versus starting on the front. Sometimes you make your mistakes in the first run, and it's better that they end up on the back of the bag just for your own benefit. So locking those needles in, smooth that down. And as I said, flip that around to the back, and we'll go from left to right. We will start at the top and we won't do any overlap stitches here, and we'll reserve the overlapping just for the end of the thread. So starting from here and passing directly through the second hole, and then just carrying on as normal. So that does mean that when we go to do the other side of the bag, we will have to sew the seam from this side, and this will effectively be the back. But we'll get to that once I've finished this one. So get into your rhythm with this seam. I will speed up the video from now. I will overlap for 3 just at the end, and then do my knot in the 1, 2, 3, 4, the 4th hole from the end, and then I will resume the video back when we get up to this one.
So just at this point you'll see I've turned the bag around and I'm now doing my 3 overlap stitches going in the other direction. And just here on the final third overlap stitch we're doing the knot. So finishing the knot on the gusset side of that seam panel. So I've just finished stitching the right side of the back panel and I've done my 3 overlap stitches just at the base, so that's all finished. We're now going to move on to the left seam of the back panel, and as I was alluding to before, instead of it facing this direction, we're actually going to stitch it with the gusset facing us, and that's going to allow us to still go from left to right, doing all the finger tension with our left hand and stitching with our right hand, and we will still do the 3 overlap stitches at the end of our seam. Because the angled stitching, those diamond shaped stitching holes, have been made on the back panel, not the gusset panel, our stitch work should still look really neat on this side, and they should fall into the appropriate half of that diamond shaped hole as we're going through. Just take care as you're going that your tension is being held appropriately on this side at the back of the work, so you do want to make sure that that's still looking as neat as possible, because it will end up on the kind of the main face of the bag. So I've got my second thread ready to go and just going to thread him up. Just try and smooth it near the eye of the needle as much as you can so that it doesn't risk any splittage as you're stitching. And then going through the first, and just go ahead and pop the second needle through that second hole as well, and pull both at the same time so that you can find the center of that thread, and then we're stitching as normal, but we're facing the gusset as if that was our top side of the work. I will just stitch a few now and we'll have a look at what the underside is looking like. So there's a few stitches made now, and it's still looking just about as neat as our other side is looking. Our gusset side's looking really neat as well. So I'm going to go ahead and speed up the video. I'm going to take it all the way to the end, still do my 3 overlapped stitches at the end of that seam. Once that's done, we're halfway through the last stitching of this entire bag. We'll have to just do the exact same that we've done on the back, on the front as well. So you're more than welcome to skip to the end of this video where we do the burnishing. You can do this stitching on the couch, watching something, which is always fun. We're almost done. We'll just be burnishing the ends, clipping these corners. The bag is almost there, ready to use. So that's the back panel seams done. Now you'll see that I'm moving on to the front. Because it is the same process as the back panel, I haven't stopped the video to keep further explaining. If you do have any questions though, please get in touch via the Made From Home Facebook group that I've set up, and I can answer any of your questions there and share further tips and insights as to how I completed those saddle stitched seams. So we're up to the final stages of making the bag. I've just finished both of the front stitching for the body seams, and you would have seen as well that I've done the overlapping at the end, no overlapping at the top, but I have started my first stitch in the strap. Exact same process that we did on the back. Next stage is actually flatten the stitches, and the easiest way to do that is to actually do it from the inside of the gusset, just so that we've got a nice flat bag to work with. So if you want to take your bone folder, and we're just pressing that stitching down and sliding along. That should also help to flatten it from the other side if you've got a nice hard desk. So go ahead and do that on all 4 body seams. Great, so once you've done that, then we'll take our polyboard and we will just open up that hole that we've tied the knot in, and we can seal that up with some glue. So I'm doing that from the gusset side, just so that when that dries up, it's kind of less conspicuous, it's not on the front side of the bag. So go ahead and do that for all 4 knots. Great, so once that's done, I'm just going to trim this little corner off the base of the bag and try to get back that nice rounded shape that's hidden underneath from the strap. So I'm taking the snips, just grabbing it from the excess that's coming out from underneath, and we're just going to clip it off like so. If you can get in a bit tighter so it does look rounded, then that'll help you when you get to burnishing it later. But you should have the leather pinching together at the end there. It shouldn't be open, it should be glued together. And then you'll see that the strap edge is visible just beyond that. So go ahead and do that to all 4 corners. Then you'll need your sandpaper. We can start on the back here as well. The aim here is to make this as flush as possible and to potentially take off any glue that has spilled over. So you can do this in a backwards and forwards motion or go in one direction, doesn't really matter. You just want all of those leather layers stacked nice and flush so it's a nice level surface. Try not to scrape the front of the bag in the process. And you would take it to the top edge of that back panel and gusset panel. No need to go beyond the strap there because you've already finished that really nicely. To help you remove any leather dust, you can use your towel. That should help to show you whether you've sanded enough or not. And you can also sand that bottom where we've just clipped. Make sure you're sanding just the cut edge. You're not sanding any of the actual leather surfaces, just the edge itself. Sand over that strap end really nicely so it's all uniform and it's kind of merging with the rest of the leather. That's looking pretty good. So you're not quite finished with the sanding there. What you might have here is a very square edge. So once we take the burnishing tool to it, it's actually going to like mushroom out, and we're going to get these kind of dags hanging off those hard corners. So we want to actually sand through and take those hard corners off. So you want to hold this at an angle. You can move it in an upwards motion,
going towards the raw edge. Just make sure you're not causing any abrasion to the stitching. Just moving it up. You can see there I'm getting a bit of a radius now on that edge, and that's what you want there. You want it to be nice and rounded, so it's not going to catch on anything. Those kind of hard edges, they will just kind of get flappy and catch on everything you walk past. So the rounder those edges are, the cleaner they're going to look over a longer period of time. So you can see that side now is looking nice and rounded, but you will need to do that same process to the other side of that seam. So that's that seam done. That should be nice and rounded enough for us now. It's looking pretty flush. Just take off any of the dust that's come off from that sanding. And now I'll just speed up the video whilst I do the other 3 edges and get this ready for burnishing. So I spent a bit of time there making sure I've given those edges a nice good sand, and now just spending another bit of time cleaning up the mess. So just taking all the dust off of those edges and off the bag itself. I think you'll agree they're looking super nice now. They're all nice and level now. There's no protruding bits. sticking out, everything's meeting up, and they're all nicely rounded too. So when we get to them with the burnishing stick, there's not going to be any hard edges on there. So that's the next step. Grabbing out your gum, this burnishing stick, and your sponge applicator. And we can do probably half at a time to start with. Just wetting that edge with the gum, making sure you get those rounded edges as well, so there's no dry bits on that edge. Then just running your finger over it, making sure it feels a little bit soapy. If it doesn't, it means you haven't put enough on, just so enough has actually soaked into the leather. There we go. Get it nice and soaked up in there. Then I'm probably going to start in the second one. And might move up to the third to get around that base corner. You can see it's going pretty dark because I'm probably going faster than I was on the straps. But that's getting a nice gloss now. And that's looking nice around that base corner too. So go ahead and do the other half of that. Make sure you cover any raw bits leading up to the strap that you might have sandpapered off in the last step. This is one of my favourite steps of bag making, the very last edge burnishing. This is really where you can make the bag shine, and it's what really makes it look finished, in my opinion. So you can keep applying the gum and burnishing as you need to, if you want to take it darker, or if it needs to be smoother, or if it's not really polishing up properly. But that's looking totally merged now. You can't tell at all that that is 4 layers of leather, and it's nice and rounded due to our sanding. So I'm going to go ahead and do the exact same thing to the other 3 edges. One of the last steps we're going to do here is run some water over the bag. So this is just a dish of clean water. This is a clean foam or sponge. It does look blue because I have used it for dyeing in the past, so don't think it's a dirty sponge. Definitely use a clean sponge for this. Squeezing out most of the water if you can, and then just taking off any excess water from your hands. We can start on the back for this one again, just to see how the leather reacts. And we're just going to pass the water from seam to seam over the entire bag. And what this is doing is it's just rehydrating the leather. It's soaking up into all of the stitching holes, so it'll soak in the water and it'll expand. So it's effectively closing any open holes that are still there. And it should remove any light scuffs or marks that maybe you've made on the leather with your awl, or maybe the sandpaper during the making of the bag. And we're going to do that for all of the panels. You'll see there that the water soaks in at different rates depending on where it is. There's some scars there that take the water in a lot more than some other areas. There is a slight wax finish on this leather, so it's not what's called a naked leather, so it won't draw it in completely, and that's completely normal for this. The best thing is that we want to apply the water consistently, so we don't just want a droplet of water in the middle of the panel. That can potentially cause some staining. We want to apply it uniformly as much as we can. Now that the base panel is wet, you can use this opportunity to try and squeeze those edges in a little bit more as well. This will give you harder edges along those seams. If you so wish, we can pinch these together that little bit more. Don't want them super flat, that's why I'm not using the bone folder. But I'm just encouraging them to give us a flatter base by pinching them together. And because the leather is wet, it's going to be a little bit more soft and supple to take whatever shape I mold it into, and then when it dries, it'll effectively set. So the leather should dry fairly quickly. There's only a few wet spots on the front now. You can do the strap as well. And then just let that to air dry. Shouldn't take long at all, maybe 5 more minutes. The very, very last step will be conditioning the bag with a leather dressing. So this is the last stage. If you have a leather dressing, a beeswax balm of some sort, I highly recommend you seal the bag with something so that when you take it out, it is a bit more waterproofed and weather protected. If you don't have anything, perhaps just don't take it out when it's raining, or just be mindful that it will pick up oils or water stains along the way, and that's just a natural characteristic of the leather. I have just started selling these on my website, but I haven't included them in the kit just because it'll inflate the price a little bit too much. I do offer these as a complimentary thing in my studio workshops, but if you're ever in the neighbourhood, definitely come by and you can try it out. I find it's the best one for the leather I use, just because it is a beeswax based balm, and it just softens the leather up, it weatherproofs it, and it will darken it slightly, but it's very much well worth popping it on there for making the bag last as long as possible in your wardrobe. So you'll see there I've just applied a bit of a smear in the jar there and applied it to a white rag. I have used this yesterday as well to protect another bag of mine, so it has already got the beeswax stains on there. So use a clean white, preferably dry rag, popping it on there and just smoothing out any lumpy bits. And we'll start with the back panel first. You can always test a new product on the pocket on the inside to see if you're happy with the result, but I know this product very well, so I'm just going to go straight into the back panel and just apply it as smoothly as you can from seam to seam. Go over the edges, run it over the stitching. This entire bag can be gone over with this product. If you ever have a bag with metal trims on there, the metal shouldn't be coated, just your leather and your stitching. So that's going to protect that little bit more, and definitely over the edges too, so it's going to add more seal to our burnishing, and it's going to help to polish it up more as well. Try not to rub too hard because that might cause further burnishing, but you can see already it's softening the leather and it is making it a little bit shinier, and it's also darkening slightly. All of which are totally normal when it comes to veg tan. It's still a very organic product, so adding these things will change it slightly. So you can kind of see the difference in the sheen, hopefully from there. And then just go ahead and finish the entire bag like that. Lastly, make sure you do the straps. So I would recommend for a bag like this with heavy use that you would condition this at least 4 times a year, maybe more, depending on the kind of elements the bag is getting exposed to. I'll let you be the judge of that. If you do start seeing wear and tear, you can give it a clean with some saddle soap and then repeat this wax process. That's it. That's it, she's finished.
So that's it, everyone. You've completed the Elevation Tote leather kit workshop. Thanks so much for joining me with this. I think you'll find that this one is a really rewarding project to do, especially while we're all isolating at home. Leave me any feedback if you like on the Facebook page that I've set up called Symmetry Made from Home, or send me a DM on Instagram. I'd love to hear what you thought about this tutorial, and I'd love to see how all your tote bags came out. So send me some pictures too. What you'll be left with, I think you'll agree, is a really wearable tote. I think this is something you're going to cherish for a long time. So thanks for joining me on this tutorial, and I really hope to see you on the next one.